The coronavirus pandemic has pushed many sectors to find new ways of doing business safely. One of the sectors hardest hit was the aviation sector. Around 54 million passengers flew by plane within Africa during the pandemic in 2020. In the previous year, twice as many traveled. According to figures from the African Airlines Association, the turnover of airlines on the continent decreased by around $8 billion. But this is 2021, and African airlines are looking to see growth on the horizon. And that's where the International Air Travel Association's Travel Pass comes into play. The Pass aims to become the go-to digital health passport containing vaccination, testing, and travel requirements. The wider rollout of the IATA Travel Pass could be only weeks away. Last month, the African Airlines Association and Ethiopian Airlines concluded the 9th Aviation Stakeholders Convention with an alignment on priorities for the efficient recovery of the air transport industry on the continent. According to Tewalde Gabrimiana, Ethiopian Airlines Group CEO, he has urged a consolidation of efforts as well as sustainable, interconnected and affordable air transport in Africa, as these are in line with the continent's development and integration. I'm Tolulokwe Adileru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me is Tony Ukachukwu. He's the CEO of Aviators Africa. Tony, good morning and welcome to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me. Hello, Tony.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to be here. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can hear you now. Thank you so much, Tony. So let's start with this. Let's look at the background of the IATA Travel Pass. Was this simply in response to the pandemic, or was something like this or similar to this in the works before COVID-19 hit the world?
Well, it will be, because the world is a dynamic, we're in a dynamic world, I think it will be a reply to the pandemic, looking for innovative solutions, to curtail the effects of the pandemic. So it's a response to the fallout of the pandemic to look for more proactive and innovative way to make sure that the aviation sector is sustained even during the pandemic.
All right, so there are different aspects to the Travel Pass. In terms of how it works for airlines, take us through that.
Okay, so basically, Rwanda Air in February 25th came out, they'll be the first airline to try out the IATA Travel Pass, between Rwanda and Nairobi. But effectively, on April the 26th, Ethiopian Airlines actually was the first to try this pass from Addis for passengers going out from Addis to Washington and Canada and back from Canada and London as well. So basically it's to authenticate and verify, passengers who have been vaccinated, for them to be able to be carried by these airlines. Because of course, there has been issues of fake vaccinations, certificates and all that. So to make sure that airlines don't fall short and be at the risk of carrying people that are infected, the trial pass was done to make sure that it can be curtailed and authenticate and verify the authenticity of those passengers who claim they have been vaccinated. So that digital health pass was going to help to facilitate this.
Okay, so we know that the aviation industry around the world is looking to increase air travel as well as passenger confidence with the Travel Pass. So you've explained how it works for the airlines. In terms of how it works for the customers, for the passengers, take us through that. Because if this is for the airlines to verify the vaccination, what then do passengers do to be able to use this Travel Pass?
So basically, for those that have been vaccinated, usually you're supposed to have some kind of your health card, okay? And usually they come with a PR code, okay? So, and these airlines have come up with apps. It might vary from one airline to another. I don't know how specifically each airline uses theirs, but because you've been vaccinated and have a card, just like your yellow fever card, for yellow fever back in the day, now you have your card for, COVID-19, and it comes with a QR code. So with that QR code, being put through the app for the airline, you to be able to authenticate, the vaccination of the passenger. So if it's real and authenticated, then you are good to go. However, if it comes out, that is not is negative, then of course you are not clear to go. So basically, but this might vary from one airline to another in terms of implementation and usage. But basically, this is what it is. As a passenger, you claim to have been vaccinated. You have your card. It has a QR code. You have to be passed through, the app of the airline who have the trial health pass. Then, if it's good to go, then of course you have safe carriage.
All right. So we've talked about the aspects that involve the airlines and the passengers, but let's quickly look at this, because I know in the initial commentary around it, there is also supposed to be information. So if I'm a passenger or a flyer who wants to move from Nigeria to Kenya, the air travel pass is supposed to help me also know the necessary COVID information, protocols, whatnot, travel requirements for getting into Kenya. Is that correct?
Definitely, because each country that any passenger wants to travel to have their own health protocols. So this app helps you with your particular destination for it to have all the necessary information you have to get, as to vaccination, as the time that you need to be vaccinated before being carried, and all that health protocols. So yes, this helps to, inform the passenger, well ahead of time, because you can't assume that what happens to you going to Dubai will be safe for Kenya. No, it's actually, to an African, it's surprising that it's fragmented, because it should be in unison. But what we find ourselves today here right now is that they are all fragmented and have different protocols. So that particular app for that country should be able to tell the traveler into that particular destination all the health protocols they need to observe before they are carried or having entry into that country.
All right. So while we're not arguing who tried this out first between Rwanda Air and Ethiopia, let's look at the fallout. So both of them have had some type of initial trial run for the IATA travel pass. In terms of how it played out, are we getting feedback from the airlines in terms of how it works for them, what their concerns may be, what the successes of this would have been? So how did it go?
Come again, I didn't get the last question.
How did it go when Rwanda Air and Ethiopia Airlines tried out the travel pass for a few weeks?
Okay, so basically, there's not much information as the success of how Rwanda Air tried theirs out, but it will be known that after Ethiopian Airlines tried it out, effective April the 26th, they have come to be one of the airlines that have developed the app and have developed system of the contactless check-in and systems at the airport. So if you ask me, Ethiopian Airlines is leading the way, because they've demonstrated not just in their promises, but in actual fact of implementing. And if you also will recall, Addis Airport is now a biotech airport where everything has been automated, contactless. So basically, Ethiopian Airlines is leading the way in practically carrying this travel pass going forward.
So across the continent, then, what's the expectation in terms of the rollout for the travel pass before we look at the global rollout? What are we expecting? Because we've only mentioned 2 airlines now. Is there a timeline for this? You also mentioned the fractured nature of sort of the requirements. It's different for every airline to every country. So in terms of how this travel pass is meant to roll out across the continent, what are we looking at?
Okay, so basically, I envision that they have to be slow, because if Africa is still lagging in vaccinations. So if they roll out this IATA travel pass and the larger population of the African continent, they are not vaccinated, then of course, it's not be effective. What I think is that, the African continent or countries in Africa should grow in their vaccination in an attempt to vaccinate a larger number of people in each country. Then it will prompt the airline to kind of increase the rate at which they implement this trial pass. I think, in my opinion, that's what is causing the delay, because not a lot of people have been vaccinated on the continent. That's why we have just only one air and Ethiopia leading in the way. But of course, IATA is pushing for, with its advocacy for more airlines to try it out. But I think, in my opinion, was causing a little bit delay. The people are not really vaccinated. So if you are not vaccinated, and I'm using a trial pass, we won't, of course, we only get to the level of just the PCR test. But if you're vaccinated, then of course, we can get you through the app and then check if your vaccination is authenticated and go. So I think the rollout will be slow, but we can only be optimistic.
All right, so outside of the continent, what's the rollout looking like? Because we can't imagine, we can't assume that as Africans, we're only going to travel within the continent. People are already expanding their wings, they're back in the air again. So what's the rollout like for the travel pass internationally now?
Generally, it's slow, but I mean, more awareness is, given, outside the African continent. But of course, what is also reducing the rollout, of course, most countries outside the continent are also back in lockdown situations at various degrees. So except for Africa, that is, we are largely not on lockdown, but Europe, other countries are outside Africa is really on lockdown. So that will also affect the rollout. So at this point, there are still, struggling with, getting vaccinated and doing the PCR test. For Africans going outside Africa, it's just about to get your PCR test, to any country are going in the time allotted for you to go, because right now the pass is not yet, implemented. So at this level, the rollout generally is slow, across board.
All right, so Tony, hold on. We're going to come back, and when we do, our focus is going to be on, yes, Kenya Airways. In some ramifications, we'll look at them. We'll also look at the volume of aid, the volume of need that Africa's aviation sector needs in order to get back on a path of recovery. That part of the conversation will come up right after this. Do stay with us. Tony Ukachukwu, the CEO of Aviators Africa, is still with me as we look at African aviation sector review on Business Edge today. So, Tony, let's look at some of the continent's more premium or premier airlines. So, Kenya Airways expanded its code-share agreements with the U.S. carrier Delta. And by doing this, Kenya's national carrier has now extended its offerings in the United States. In addition, Kenya Airways will use JFK International Airport to connect to other North American destinations. What do you think about this deal, especially in light of the fact that the airline recently ended a similar agreement with the Air France KLM group?
It's a welcome idea. I'm very delighted to hear that that JV partnership come to play. Because if you know, just like you rightly said, the KLM Kenya Airways deal fell apart because, it was not a win-win situation. Kenya Airways was looking at a situation where, they were not benefiting from that joint venture and they had to evaluate it, and then, came out of the marriage. Because JV is kind of a marriage. When a marriage is no longer working, you look for other options, to get out of it. So this Kenya Airways Delta JV agreement is a welcome development for Kenya Airways. It's going to boost Kenya Airways productivity and liking in the sector, because now it has opened more visas for its operations. So I think it's a welcome development, and it's definitely going to see Kenya improving on their operations.
All right, and staying with Kenya Airways, we know the government seemingly has not changed its mind about the issue of nationalization of the airline. Parliament is seeking to pass the National Aviation Management Bill 2020 that will make the airline one of the 3 subsidiaries in a soon-to-be-formed aviation holding company. Kenya Aviation Corporation will also hold shares in the operating entities. What do you think about this nationalization move for Kenya? And do you think it could work as it did with Ethiopian Airlines?
Okay, so the nationalization move has been a little bit quiet, with the government of Kenya. But I think the attention should be paid to what Kenya Airways is doing at the moment to make sure that, it gets out of its position of loss making. And so for this first move with Delta Airlines, it's one positive move by Kenya Airways. So in the coming days, we'll see what the nationalization argument to become. I'm not really for the nationalization argument, but again, because there will be a whole lot of interference with the operation of the airline. However, not much has been heard about that in recent times. But again, I choose to stay on the positive of what Kenya Airways is doing with the management, to turn the situation around. And I think it's kudos for them to have been able to pull this JV out, being in same one-word alliance with Delta Airlines.
So you've touched a bit on my next question, because when we look at the Kenya Airways situation, we look at the South African Airways issue, national carriers both. We look at the liquidation of Air Namibia, another national airline. We look at what's supposed to have happened with Air Nigeria just a few short years ago, and we get back to asking ourselves, should African governments still be pursuing national airlines? Tony, what do you think about that?
Government has no business pursuing national airlines. It's dated. It has no business in the current scheme of things. Government only needs to provide an enabling environment for private sector-owned businesses in the aviation sector to thrive. National carrier, as we've seen in the time past, has not really worked on the continent except for only one shining example, which is Ethiopian Airlines. Okay, and if you look at Kenya and South Africa, thank God for South Africa 2.0 that will be coming on soon after it sold its shares, 51% share to a consortium. So we're looking to see with the South African government owning 49% share, but of course with veto power on nationalistic issues. But again, what I'm trying to say here is that states in Africa should do away with national carriers. Rather, they should provide enabling environments for private sector to operate in these sectors. For example, the Air Namibia issue, it was a good thing from the government. The government had to put a stop to it because they cannot continue to pump money into a loss-making airline, even though some people were kicking for it to come back. But the Namibian government was headstrong on this idea. Now it's to provide an environment for private sector participation. So back to the question that you are asking me, including and also bringing this to Nigeria, we don't need a national carrier at the point. Yes, national carrier has its benefit, but the vital question is, do we as citizens have the discipline, okay, to let these entities work independently? I doubt very much so.
All right, so let's focus on the recovery of the African aviation sector now before we wrap things up. Over $30 billion was pledged for air transport and tourism in Africa by international finance agencies and other institutions, including the AFDB, AU, and IMF. However, most of this relief is yet to reach the airlines and even other aviation stakeholders in need. What do you know about the relief, and what do you know about what's causing the delay in funds getting to those in the sector?
So first of all, it's surprising to know that Africa always drags in recognizing the fact that aviation is an socio-economic driver that catalyzes every other sector. See, this singular fact should be able to drive government in facilitating aid and grants and subvention, whatever you call it, to help airlines to thrive, because they catalyze other sectors and the value chain as well, including tourism, hospitality, and all what have you. So, but again, when you come to what is delaying it, of course, a whole lot of bureaucratic bottlenecks, a lot of aviation businesses is rested in the government's hands in Africa, as against, the private sector elsewhere in the world. So government is heavily invested in aviation in Africa, which should not be, So, and government comes to bureaucracy, okay? So having to deal with this bureaucracy is what is causing the delay. Give example, 27 billion was released by Nigerian government for a very long time. Before the money got to the airlines, it took a long time. But how much got to the airlines? It was just 4 billion that got to the airlines. Now, 3 billion is being stocked somewhere. We have some information that is going to be reserved for the national carrier. But again, 4 billion for all the airlines in Nigeria is like a drop in the ocean. So these are some of the issues where you go from one country to another. They have some bureaucratic bottlenecks that is making them not release this fund or have access to this monies. And of course, again, these people that are giving them these grants or loans need some kind of assurance, from this government. And if they don't see it coming, then their funds will not be released. So these are the bottlenecks, across African countries. But the earlier that they see that the aviation sector needs to come back on stream, the better it is for the continent.
And you've led me in a roundabout way to my next question, because it's not just that 30 billion. So reportedly, there's also about $601 million in airline funds that remain blocked across the continent in 17 countries, including Nigeria, Algeria, Angola, Malawi, and Mozambique, just to name a few. this is putting more pressure on airlines as they continue to struggle. And a lot of airlines were even struggling before the pandemic hit. So when you look at the value chain that's linked to the airline industry, and as you said it as well, the socioeconomic value, catering, logistics, hotels, transportation, do you think that African countries are taking the recovery of the sector seriously enough?
No, my answer would be no. The capital, no, they're not taking it seriously enough. Perhaps, they don't understand the effect, but they're not taking it seriously enough. Even before the pandemic, airlines were loss-making pre-pandemic. Only Ethiopian Airlines was profit-making. Then the pandemic has even worsened how things are. I would have thought that during the lockdown, state governments should have been rushed to see how they can help the airlines come back, so that the recovery can be faster. But unfortunately, airlines are still struggling. And in Nigeria, for example, airlines are really, really struggling, to stay afloat, going by maintenance equipment that are stuck abroad, for access to Forex, inflation and what have you, coupled that they are not getting enough money for subvention to help them stay afloat. So it's a tough time, for the airlines in Nigeria and across the continent. But it's my hope that, government will wake up and, begin to see that when airlines suffer, a whole lot of other sectors suffer as well. So, Tony, as we wrap things up, let me ask you this. We may not be able to get back to pre-COVID-19 passenger numbers this year or even next. But what do you think are the top 3 things that are necessary to get the African aviation sector on the road to recovery, or back to the skies, as we want to say? What do you think? So basically, it all boils down to government. Government should make sure that they give the aviation sector the needed support that they require at this time. Needed support means basically providing an enabling environment for them to operate, okay? An enabling environment means don't overtax them, don't overburden them with multi-taxes, give them some tax holidays, give them holidays on import duties, look for ways to make sure that fuel is not so high, because fuel amounts for 60% of operation, cost of operation, So these are ways governments can come and help the airline recover faster. If they don't get the airline support, ASAP, let me talk for Nigeria, especially. Though airlines want to come into the fray, but I bet you that airlines will fall out of the sky. I mean, not fall out of the sky because they are flying, but I mean, stop operation because they are in actually intensive care units as we speak. All right, Tony Kachukwu, we'll leave the conversation there for now, but we know throughout this year and into the next few weeks, we'll also be touching base. And we'll also look to see how the IATA Travel Pass is actually truly rolling out, not just here on the continent, but internationally as well. Tony Kachukwu, thank you as always for joining me on Business Edge. My pleasure. Thank you very much. We'll wrap things up with NC4 to watch, and that comes your way just after this. And we're wrapping things up with a few stories that we're keeping our eyes on. We start in the western parts of the continent, where the Ghana Investment Promotion Center plans to attract $3 billion in foreign direct investments into the country this year. And the FDI is expected to boost investments in agribusiness, pharmaceutical manufacturing and industry, as well as other sectors of the economy. Reginald Yofi Grant, the CEO of the center, said they have so far raised $780 million. Second on the list, Kenya's Finance Committee, which is made up of members from the National Assembly Finance and National Planning Committee, has rejected the tax imposition on bread. Another tax that was rejected was the digital services tax, which would have taxed digital services offered in Kenya. The Kenya Revenue Authority was to invoice digital marketplaces for 1.5% of the gross transaction value. Number 3 on the list, Mozambique has announced plans to sell a majority stake in the planned $2.4 billion Umpanda Unkawe hydropower dam that will be one of the biggest in southern Africa. Carlos Hume, the director of the project, said that government will issue a request for proposals this year and will take up to 4 months to select the winner and another 6 weeks to negotiate the joint development agreement. The goal is to reach financial close by 2024 on the 1,500 megawatt facility and an associated transmission line that could increase the total project cost to as much as $4.4 billion.
And finally, Port and Terminal Multi-Services Limited said that non-linkage of the digital portal of the Central Bank of Nigeria and the Nigeria Customs Service is affecting smooth export processes at the port. The Nigeria Shippers Council has also pleaded with the CBN to prioritize maritime businesses across the country by intervening to enhance port access and processes. And that's it on this edition of Business Edge. Thank you for joining us. Head to our website, to our YouTube channel, as well as download our mobile app on Play Store and App Store for any of our conversations on financial, business, and economic stories coming from here on the continent. I'm Tolu Lokpe Adelere Balogun. I'll see you next time.